Okay, so our next section here is going to be a high-level overview of Scrum. We're going to go through and talk about roles, ceremonies, a few artifacts, and a few other things, high-level topics of the basics around Scrum, and basically giving you a nice overview of what Scrum is and kind of how it relates as a lightweight framework to be able to execute in an agile way. So let's look at the basics around Scrum and the Scrum Flow. We have several items identified here, and some of the things we're going to talk about in the Scrum section also include things that aren't technically in the Scrum framework itself, but are very, very helpful and very necessary in order to make this framework be very effective for you moving forward. Looking at this flow, we have several elements. We have the product backlog, we have a sprint backlog, we have daily Scrum meetings, we have a potentially shippable product at the end, and then you can see the green arrows with the different flows that we have. We're going to go over each one of these areas, but if you think about it as a whole, your product backlog is basically your items that you have that you want to do. This is your to-do list, all the different things we want to do. A sprint backlog is my to-do list over the next week or 2 weeks. I know this diagram says 2 to 4 weeks. Most Scrum teams now are doing 1 to 2 week sprints. As you can see, Agile is evolving as we move forward as well, with the idea that every 24 hours, that little loop you see on the top where you have a daily Scrum meeting is one of the ceremonies we're going to talk about called Scrums, daily Scrums, or iteration daily meetings, where we talk about how we have certain touch points, and it's part of the Scrum cadence. And then you have at the end, you have your potentially shippable product increment that you go through. But let's talk about first the product backlog. So the product backlog, again, is a list, and we call them story cards of different things that we're going to do. And we write these down on story cards. We're going to talk a little bit about story cards in this session over the next four online sessions that we have. But going through this backlog is, these are the things we want to do, and we've got them broken down by small enough features that we can understand what they are. They're written in such a way that we can understand what the value is, what it's supposed to do, and so that anyone can read these cards. But most importantly, they're written in a way that anybody can read them. The product backlog items or the story cards, they're made visible somewhere. If you've got the ability to make them visible on site, that's great, but they're made visible or accessible in many different ways. And making sure that they're available, whether they're digital or whether they're non-digital, making sure that they're visible and available. We want them prioritized and organized by business value. We're going to talk about that a little bit later as well. There's a role that called the product owner that's going to be involved in this. That person is charged with making sure that the prioritization and the organization of those things that we want to do are done by a certain business value, which is defined by every organization a little bit differently, and that's fine. But that's their responsibility, and they will continuously do this on a regular basis. There's also another ceremony we will talk about, which talks about going through and doing that on a regular basis. So looking at this, we want to make sure it's regularly reviewed and maintained, as we said. It does not include vacations, meetings, or other items not pertaining to the product, meaning that when we look at the flow of different things, we want to make sure that our capacity is optimally identified, to make sure that if there are any vacations, maybe it's the holidays, it's over Thanksgiving or the New Year's, we want to make sure those things are kind of pulled out of there, so that this flow of available capacity to do this work over this week, 2 week, 3 week period is accurate in terms of the real available time. And we want just enough to create the product. We want to have good descriptions, but we don't want to have too detailed of a description where we're actually getting into all the technical hows of how we're going to make this happen. It's really about the what and the why and who it's for, and trying to show the value of this item and talk about it. There are other things that we do through this flow and the Scrum basics that go through and start to detail out what those things are, and we start to do that at certain different times.